right, hello, my name is Ari. I am a history major. I'll be graduating in 2 days. And we are here at Koreshan State Park. I actually just wrote my senior thesis on the Koreshans, so that is why I'm leading your tour today. So just a little bit of background on Koreshans. They were a cult. They settled here in 1893 in Estero, Florida, and they were led by Dr. Cyrus Reed Teed. Overall, some of their beliefs before we get started, they were celibate, they were anti-marriage, anti-patriarchy, they believed in hollow earth theory. Overall, they had some pretty unique ideas, but they also believed in gender equality, and they were not racist at all. So they were a very interesting area, and they were one of the first people to really settle down here and establish Estero. So let's head on in. Alright, so here we're still at the entrance of Koreshan, but you can see a photo of some of the Koreshans. I'd like to point out that there are a lot of women here, and that's because at the height of the cult there were about 250 people, and out of that 200 of them were women. So you can see them all here, and in this one you could see that they're dressed up for what looks like to be a play. And so the Koreshans were actually a very artistic people, and they performed a lot, and so that leads us to our next stop, which is the art hall, where they performed all of their plays and orchestras and what have you. Alright, so we are here at the art hall now, and I'd like to start by talking about Cyrus Teed a little bit. He was the cult leader, if y'all remember from before. Cyrus Teed was born in 1839 in Utica, New York. He was born into a very religious family who expected him to be a Baptist preacher just like his grandfather had been. He did not go down that route, however, because he had a vested interest in science. So he became a doctor, and he was also enlisted in the Civil War. So, one day in New York, Teed was doing an alchemy experiment because he was very interested in alchemy, which is the study of trying to turn other metals into gold, pretty much. And so during one of his experiments, Teed actually shocked himself, and he had what he called his illumination. In his illumination, Teed saw an angel who came to him. She, in short, told him that he was God, that he was a prophet, that she was also God, so she was part of the Trinity, and that he was set to rid the world of evil and create a new society, which is what we have here at Koreshan State Park, his new society, which he called his New Jerusalem. In total, again, there were 250 members, but Teed wanted there to be about 10 million members, so he didn't quite make that goal, now did he? But the members that did live here, they were really big on the arts. They performed a lot of plays and operas. Edison had even come to see one. Every single Koreshan knew how to play an instrument. They were required to do that. So they were very artistic people. So this land in general, where the art hall is sitting, was actually given to them by a man named Gustav Domkoller. But in total, they didn't just have this settlement. They had 7,500 acres of land here in southwest Florida, and that spanned all the way to the Mound Key and Fort Myers Beach. They had a lot of land down here. So this is just a little snippet of it. Something I spoke about earlier is they believed in the hollow earth theory. So the hollow earth theory is pretty much the belief that the earth is hollow and we live inside of the inner shell of the earth, or the outer shell rather, and that all of the planets are suspended from within that shell. Teed proved this theory on Naples Beach with one of his telescopes and a scientist that he found. He went through many scientists until he was able to find one that was actually able to prove his theory. So yeah, this is the art hall. All right, so we are here at the general store. So as you can see, this building was built in 1920. But if you think back to what I had said earlier, the cult was settled in 1893. So why hadn't this been erected sooner? Well, the reason for that is the building actually used to be on the riverfront over there. But because of a severe storm, it got flooded and destroyed. So they had to rebuild it here in 1920 on the roadside, which actually came to their advantage because it was around that time that cars started being more heavily used. So people weren't using the river as much to travel, and it made sense for it to be on the road, which, you know, today we don't go everywhere by river, so it worked out in their favor. The general store is actually a really important part of Koreshan because it was how they got money from the outside. So when the Koreshans came here, they were a commune. They put all of their goods and money and belongings in together and they shared it. It was a socialist society. So when they needed to get stuff from the outside world, they only had so many resources to do so, and the cult was in debt for most of its existence. So this is how they got that money. If you come over here with me, you are able to see some of the original things that they were selling here at Koreshan. One of the biggest money makers that the Koreshans had was leavened bread, risen bread, and it was something that was rare here. So these are some of the things they sold. This store was also used as an inn, a bed and breakfast. So on the top floor, where all of those windows are boarded up, people would stay there overnight. And that's because this building, this general store, was the only one located in between Fort Myers and Naples. So think, back in 1920, our cars did not go nearly as fast as they did today. Making that long journey from Fort Myers to Naples took way longer than 45 minutes. And if you needed to stop somewhere, this was the place to do it. All right, so we are right next to the general store now. But we found a little friend. Here, if you look inside that hole, there is a gopher tortoise. Gopher tortoises are actually a keystone species here in Florida. And what that means is if something happened to them, it would be detrimental for the environment as a whole. They're extremely important little guys and need to be protected for that reason. The reason they're so important is because they form these burrows. And you can see he's in his burrow right now. But those burrows get to be about 30 to 40 feet long. And during the event of a fire, a lot of different animals retreat to those burrows. You'll find snakes, rabbits, gopher tortoises, any small animal you could think of just cohabiting within that burrow. So it's really important for these little guys to stay alive and to be protected because fires are a very natural thing here in Southwest Florida. We're currently in fire season. It started like this week. So, you know, when lightning strikes a tree, it's going to burn. The fire's going to spread to other trees and the larger animals can run away. But these little guys, they can't always do that. So that's why these guys are so important. All right, so we are here at the Bamboo Landing. This was the original entrance into Koreshan because the first car bridge didn't cross the Caloosahatchee until 1924. And the settlement was settled in 1893. So for those years, they needed to get to the settlement in a way that wasn't cars. So this is how they did it. This river, the Estero River, it leads out to Estero Bay and then eventually the Gulf of Mexico. So, you know, it's easy to get in here. It's not too difficult. This water is currently impaired, which means that it's not healthy water. I believe it's because of too much nitrogen, mostly from the runoff from all the cars because Interstate 41 is right there. It's highly polluting this river. But the water in the river is brackish, which basically means that it's a little less salty than marine water, but it's more salty than freshwater. It's a mix of the two. And yeah, if y'all are taking a field trip here, you have the chance to canoe here as well, and it's a great opportunity, very fun. I would like to speak about the bamboo behind us real quick. So the Koreshans planted this bamboo because they love gardening, actually. They have sunken gardens over further into the settlement, but they planted this bamboo as an aesthetic thing. This is actually a type of bamboo called running bamboo, and it has invasive tendencies, and that's because when this bamboo is planted, its roots will shoot for like 20 feet, and then another, clump of bamboo will appear 20 feet away. And that's why you can actually see there's bamboo on the other side of this river, because this bamboo has invasive tendencies. An invasive species I'd like to point out is a species that outcompetes native ones. So that means it's taking the nutrients, it's taking what the other species that are native to this area needs to survive, and it's doing harm to the environment. All right, so something I'd like to point out to y'all is this sign right here. So it has photos that I really love pointing out. This is what the bamboo landing used to look like. You could see that they used to perform on the landing. You could also see the bamboo in the background, how less of it there is compared to now. They also had these pillars here, which made it such a beautiful entrance, but this is it shows you how much this area has changed over the last about 130 years. So, yeah. All right, so now we are here at the Dom Kohler Cottage. Dom Kohler, his full name was Gustav Dom Kohler. He was a homesteader and a German who had attained a lot of land here in Southwest Florida. And he actually is the man who gave all of this land to the Koreshans, 300 acres in total. So Gustav had heard about the Koreshans in 1893 or 2, I believe, and he invited them to come down to his settlement here and was interested in what they believed in, because he had heard some stuff from flyers and wanted to talk to them himself. Well, by the end of talking to Cyrus Teed, there are written accounts of him being like, "Master, master, my lord," and he completely believed in Koreshanity after speaking with Cyrus Teed. So he gave all of this land to the Koreshans, and on top of that, Gustav had a family. So his family actually resided here. His son did not believe in Koreshanity, but the Koreshans allowed him to live on the land and be taken care of for free until he turned 21 for that reason, as a kind gesture to Gustav for giving them all of this land. So this is his cottage. This cottage was just for Gustav. Many of the Koreshans lived in a dormitory style housing, so him having his own cottage shows his importance within the community. So if you come in, you could see what it looked like. There is a bed, a chessboard, a table, and that is about it. Alright, so we are here at the founder's house now. And the founder's house was Cyrus Teed's house. He lived in this house with a woman named Victoria Gradia, and Victoria he believed to be his equal. So when Cyrus believed that when you die, you come back as the gender that you were not born as originally. So when Cyrus died, he was going to come back as a woman, and he believed Victoria to be that equal of his. It's a very weird, messy concept to understand, but he treated her as such, as his equal. This building actually doubled as both the schoolhouse and the dentist's office as well, which I think is very funny, because when Cyrus died, Victoria was supposed to take over the cult for him because she was the equal. but she didn't have the respect of the Koreshans. She was the only problematic one within the cult, and that's because she had this attitude of, I'm taking over the cult when he's gone, I'm the big, her, like, she had a power, the power went to her head. They didn't respect her for that reason, and so when he died, she ran off with the dentist. And that, I always like to think, it makes you question how celibate this community was, because this was her house and the dentist's office. So, little food for thought.
Alright, so we are inside of Cyrus Teed's house right now. And there are a few cool things that I want to point out. This was his living room. Notice how ornate and beautiful it is. All of the furniture here at Koreshan is not from Florida itself. It's actually from Chicago, where most of the Koreshans had come from, because it was in Chicago that Teed had gained his following in the 1880s and 90s. But another cool thing I'd like to point out is right there. That stone that says Cyrus Shepherd Stone of Israel. And that is actually part of Cyrus's mausoleum. When he died, he was put in a mausoleum on Fort Myers Beach. And after about 20 years, it got destroyed by a hurricane. But this is what is left of it today. And one last thing I'd really like to point out to you. Here is one of the telescopes that Cyrus used on Naples Beach to prove his hollow earth theory with the scientists who had helped him. If you come over here, here is a diagram of Mound Key, which was the capital of the Calusa Kingdom. So the Koreshans actually owned Mound Key at the time, and it was once a Native American, the Calusa Native Americans' capital, and they were known specifically for their seafood. So their diet was primarily made of seafood, and instead of discarding of all of the bones from the fish, they would actually build it up and create mounds, and they would build their homes on these mounds.
Alright, so we are at our next stop, which is the Planetary Court. So the Planetary Court, as you can see, is a 3-story building, the top being the cupola. Inside of the building lived 7 women and 1 man. The man actually lived inside of the cupola. He was married to one of the women before they had come and joined the cult, but since they were celibate, they lived in, separate rooms, separate beds. Something I'd like to point out is this is a very ornate and beautiful building. If you look around at the other ones, they're not nearly as well maintained or beautiful as this one. And the reason being is these women played a very important role in this society. So the Koreshans actually had their own constitution, and you could think of it as like the Planetary Court was their Senate almost. Their main job was to manage all of the business functions within the community and the ones, outside of the community. But since this was run by women, 7 women, they weren't respected by the men outside the community, because outside of Koreshan, men were running those types of things. So that was one of the main jobs of the man who lived in top of the cupola. He was kind of like the messenger boy for these women. He would talk to the men outside of the community and make those deals with them, but it was actually the women who were the brains of all of that. Let's walk along. Something I'd like y'all to notice is that there are doors that go from the bedrooms, and they go outside here, but they also have doors that go into the inner hallway of this building. And the primary purpose of this was ventilation. Here in Southwest Florida, it's hot. It's very hot, especially today. But if you didn't have air conditioning in 1893 or 1905, I believe this building was built in 1905, you needed to find other ways to keep your buildings kind of cool. And this is the purpose of this, having two doors that creates a ventilation system. Specifically, this is called shotgun architecture. And the reason it's called that is you could shoot a gun right through there and the bullet wouldn't hit anything. It would go from one door to the next. If you come around this side with me, you see there's a giant wooden barrel over here. And this barrel was used to collect rainwater because sometimes the water in the river, it just was not suitable to use, especially during the dry season when it was super salty, because there wasn't rain, which was causing more fresh water to be in it. So they would collect their rainwater from the roof and use it for drinking and showering and what have you. So let's see if we can go in. It's open. Might not be. It's not. Oh well. Alright, so here's a little pit stop that I'd like to take y'all at. We are at the grave of a woman named Hedwig Mitchell. So Hedwig, she has a very interesting story. She had escaped Nazi Germany to live here at Koreshan. She was a Jewish woman and she heard of Koreshan and thought, this is paradise. There was gender equality here. She could play an important role like one of the women of the Planetary Court. She had freedom. She wasn't being oppressed. So she had joined here and she was actually the last living Koreshan. She died in 1982. Since she died in 1982, she saw the moon landing. And the moon landing was the reason she no longer believed in Koreshanity, because the moon landing disproves the hollow earth theory. And so after that point, she was like, this is a lie. This sucks. But regardless of whether it was a lie or not, it still provided her with a safe haven away from the Nazis. All right, so we are at the bakery. This is where they, made bread. In total, the Koreshans would make about 200 to 300 loaves of bread every single day. Because think about it, there are about 250 of them, and that gives you a little bit of leftovers. But they had the capacity, and they were able to make between 500 to 600 loaves a day if they really wanted to. And that extra bread, when they did choose to make it, that would go to the general store, and it would be sold to the public. Because as we were talking about earlier, that's how they made a lot of their money, is from their bread. So on the top floor of this building, we're not allowed to go in, but that is where the men would live, most of the men. So as I had mentioned before, the Koreshans lived in a dormitory style fashion, and most of the men within this community, their job was bakers. Everybody had their own job within this society. You worked at the Planetary Court. You worked at the laundry. You cooked. You were a baker. You farmed. Everybody had only one job. So everybody only having one job within the community is kind of a nice thing if you think about it. Like, you do your one thing, whether that's baking or laundry or working in the Planetary Court, and then the rest of your life is taken care of you. Someone's always going to be doing your laundry for you, or they're going to be cooking for you, or whatever it is. So that was a wonderful thing that they did. But something I'd like to show you over here is that contraption. So what that was is it was originally where the oven for the bakery was, because it was 1905 when this building was built, or 1903 rather. And at that time, if you had an oven, it could very well burn down the building. And with all of the men living upstairs, that would kill all of the men in this community if something were to happen. So that's why they had their oven outside instead of inside. And if we would like, we could go take a quick look and peek inside of the bakery and see what else there was besides just the oven. You can see over there their baking uniforms, their outfits, bread box, lots of jars. All right, so we are on the last stop of our Koreshan field trip, and we are in the industrial area. So on top of being very artistic, the Koreshans were also a very industrious settlement. They had their own engines, laundry machines. They had it going on. So they originally had a steam engine, but then they upgraded it to a diesel one. There's an engine within that building. I believe that's the steam engine, and this is the diesel engine in here. They were able to cut wood with this, create tools with these, advances. They had electricity here even, and it definitely helps that Thomas Edison was their neighbor. But in total, they were able to do all of the laundry for the Koreshans within 11 hours every day. So that sounds like a lot, but you're doing laundry for 250 people. That's not too terrible. It takes me about 2 hours myself. So yeah, I'm just gonna end off with talking about the end of the Koreshans. So in 1908, Cyrus T died, and he had told the Koreshans that he was going to resurrect and he was going to be the prophet. He believed he was seventh in line, there was Jesus as number 6 and he was number 7. So he was going to rise again and be the prophet. He did not do that. The Koreshans had put his body in a zinc bathtub and watched it for about 2 weeks. And then the state of Florida came in and they're like, no, this isn't healthy, this is gross, you cut it out. So after that, the Koreshans put him in a mausoleum on Fort Myers Beach, which it stood there for about 20 years. The Koreshans were constantly guarding it. But then a hurricane had come and it had wiped away the mausoleum. All that's left is that stone, which is in Cyrus Teed's house, that says Cyrus, Shepherd of Israel. And from there on, a lot of the Koreshans had begun to leave the settlement because Cyrus didn't rise. That's an indication that this was all a lie. But on top of that, a few years later, well, more like 20-something years later, the Great Depression hit. And so that definitely took a hit to this place. These people were like, I gotta get out of here, I gotta go survive on my own. And by 1962, there were only 5 Koreshans left, and they had given the land over to the state of Florida. The state allowed them to reside on this land until they died, for free too. They had all of the amenities they needed, which that sounds pretty nice if I do say so myself. And in 1982, the last Koreshan, Hedwig Mitchell, who we saw her grave over there, who escaped Nazi Germany, she had died. She died in the Planetary Court building. And that is the end of the Koreshan story. Yeah.